Hey everyone, I hope you all are doing well. This time I would like to make a guide for the 5th round of the Nations Cup World Series 2025, which takes place at Trial Mountain the reverse layout with the Red Bull X2019 car. And you can already see on the middle of the screen there that we have to use all 3 tire compound for this race. So we have to use the soft tire compound, the medium tire compound, as well as the hard tire compound in this race. And you can already see the other race information settings there briefly, but nevertheless I would like to show you the other further informations from the race settings itself. As for the qualifying session, everybody will be able to have at least 2 to 3 attempts available because of the qualifying time being set to 7 minutes. But obviously it also depends on the amount of cars you have right in front of you, especially during your outlap, but on the very same time, at what time you will be released to the track, because there are a few people within the lobby who are able to join the track right away, but then there are also other drivers within the same lobby who have to wait for at least 20 to 30 seconds before the game will release them to the track. So this is something you also have to take into account. Then if we also have a look on the race settings down below, you can already see there that the starting type is a rolling start. So if we want to head into turn 1, it should be less dramatic than if this race had been a grid start with a full start check, because with that starting type, all of the other cars would have been so close to each other where if we wanted to head into turn 1, it could have resulted in some accidents, if I can say that. As for the amount of laps, everybody has to lap this circuit for 30 times. And then we can already see there that the tire wear multiplier has been set to ×3 for both the qualifier settings as well as for the race settings. And there's also the fuel consumption rate, which is set to ×1. But I can already say that you don't have to save fuel in this race. Then we also have a custom slipstream where overtake should be possible. Even though it says there's no mandatory pit stop required, we have to go into the pits anyway. But now I would like to talk about the track, showing my best lap, talking about the track limit penalties here, and lastly showcasing a race simulation run. Before we start our qualifying lap, it's already pretty important to carry a lot of speed through this section here as much as possible for the exit, so that you can start your qualifying lap with with a bit more speed, if I can say that. But here it's like pretty important to know that you can take this section flat out. Unfortunately, I don't really know how easy it is to take this section here with a gamepad, but with a steering wheel you should be able to take this section here flat out. Before we also approach turn 1, the braking reference I used was actually the beginning of the barrier on the right hand side, which you can see there. Like what the pattern changes, if I can say that. So for me personally, whenever I wanted to brake into turn 1, I always used that as a braking reference, but just before this barrier on the right hand side started to appear. Then as for turn 1, it's really important to use the curb on the inside as much as possible, but also for this one here, try not to use the sausage curb on the inside because they can unsettle your car a little bit. Now, I think this is turn 2. I would just call it turn 2 now. So the braking reference I use for turn 2 is actually the beginning of the tree shadow here, which is also reflected to the track. So for me personally, I use the shadow, like the beginning of the shadow here as a braking reference, but also being on the curb on the left hand side. Here it's pretty important to be on the 3rd gear and also use the curb on the left hand side for the exit as much as possible, but be careful, you can still spin out if you are not too careful in the end. Here, try to place your car on the curb on the right hand side. Try not to brake too much so that you won't be having a lot of understeer for the exit of that corner. Here it's really important to know that you really have to be patient with the throttle input, because you can still spin the car by not doing so, or like by not being careful here. Now the braking point for the following corner here, what I used was just before this curb on the left hand side ended. So this is where I use my braking reference, if I can say that. And the line you also have to take for the following right-hander, you have to try and stay as closely as you can to the inside wall as much as possible. Use the fourth gear for the exit so that you can have, so that you can also carry as much speed as possible for the exit there. But if you try to turn a little bit later, then you can also have a bit of understeer there and also end up losing a lot of time, which is not really ideal. Now, the braking point I used for the following right-hander there was just the end of the tunnel there, which you can see on the left-hand side before the shield appears. So yeah, this is the braking reference I use for the following right-hander. Here it's also pretty important to stay as closely as you can to the inside wall there, but be careful not to try and turn a bit too much, because then you can hit the wall otherwise and end up losing a lot of time in the end. Here it's also pretty important to use the inside, the apex there as much as possible. Now for the following left-hander, the braking reference I used here was the curb on the right-hand side, which has the little bump, which you can see there, like it goes a little bit downhill and it kind of evens out. But this is like that little bump, which happened, or like which is on the right-hand side. This is what I use as a braking reference. Here, the braking point was just before the curb ends on the left-hand side. Also try to place your car on the inside there as much as possible. Use the fourth gear for the exit. And then here it's also pretty important not to cut that left hand a bit too much, because if you do that, then you can hit the limiter, unfortunately, and also lose a little bit of momentum for the following final right-hander there before finishing a qualifying lap. And yeah, this is pretty much the track itself. It's quite enjoyable, but also really difficult with this car. But now I would like to show you my best lap, as well as two really good Sector 1 attempts, but unfortunately which I failed in the end. As for the track limit penalties, in fact it was really difficult to even receive one, but nevertheless it's still possible to receive a track limit penalty here. So the first one you were able to see here was the left-hander, which I also talked about earlier, where you shouldn't really cut that corner a bit too much, because then you would hit the limiter and lose a little bit of momentum. But if you cut those two corners a little bit too much, then you would receive a half a second time limit penalty. So please watch out for those two corners. As for the race simulation run here, I can guarantee you that you don't have to save fuel for this race. Even though it might look like on the laps remaining of the fuel map down below that you won't make it till the end of the race here, it's still just enough to make it till the end of the race. I think at the end of, towards the end of the race, I still had around 3 to 4 laps remaining. So with around 10% of fuel to go. But at the beginning of the race, obviously, as it's a rolling start, and if you would also rev out your car, then the laps remaining would also show a little bit less than maybe in this showcase run here. So you don't have to worry about saving fuel for the main race here. But nevertheless, I still wanted to say that and also showing you the fuel map down below, so that you can also that you can also rest assured by not worrying about the fuel for this race here. As for the strategy I was using for this race simulation run, like on the previous video, I was also trying to go with the soft tires first, then choosing the mediums afterwards, and then also finishing the race on a hard tire compound. The reason why for this race I chose to start this race with the soft tires once again was that, simply I just wanted to see the tire wear of the soft tires, for how long I can actually do and use the soft tires at the beginning of the race. So you can also notice that compared to the time trial lap I showcased earlier, that my gearing, or let's say the shifting itself, is also less aggressive. The reason for that is I just wanted to try and save the rear tires a little bit more to see if I did that, then if I could also use the soft tires a little bit longer, and so that I wouldn't really use the hard tires as much or even longer towards the end of the race. So because usually with this car, the main objective is to use the hard tires, not a lot, or let's say as short as possible. Because ideally, no matter what kind of race you have with the Red Bull, you would always try to use the hard tire compound for one lap only, and that's the main objective. So because of that, I still wanted to see for how long I could try to use the soft tires at the beginning of the stint here. Because ultimately, if you can try to use the soft tire compound and the medium tire compound even longer in order to reduce the amount of laps you have to you have to do with the hard tire compound, then that's really ideal. Unless the tire wear is really bad for that race setting here, where you are kind of forced to use the hard tire compound for a little bit longer than, for example, more than one lap, for example. Because the hard tire compound is really bad with this car. But other than that, I can also say that as this was my first simulation run, the lap times are also not really consistent, unfortunately. But what I can say is with the soft tire compound at the beginning of the race, you should aim to do around high 26. I think if you were trying to push at the beginning of the race, then you can maybe do mid 25s. But if you want to try and save your tires, then I think doing high 26 up to, or to low 27s is the way to go. And also with the medium tires afterwards, I was surprised at how durable the medium tires were, but also at the very same time how fast the medium tires was in the second stint. Obviously With the medium tires later on, I would also have much less fuel on board, and this would also mean that the car would also accelerate better and also be lighter for the corners, but also have a little bit better top speed. But on the very same time, you can also notice that the wind speed was also decreased, if I remember correctly, throughout the race. So maybe that might have helped my lap times as well. But with the medium tires, I was also able to do like really low 27s, like around 27.1, 27.2. And I think at the beginning of the medium tire set, you should maybe try to aim to do around 27.2 up to 0.3-ish. But then later on, improving your pace to a 27.1 at least, up to 27.2. Because towards the end of the medium tire stint, you are also able to see how much the lap times were dropping. Because at the beginning of the medium tire stint, I was doing high 27s there, and there were also few moments where I also had with the medium tires where I almost lost the car, which you're also able to see throughout this entire race simulation run. Because those corners, like those specific corners I've mentioned before, where you should really try to be careful with once you want to put the power down, you should not underestimate them. Obviously, if you have fuel on board, with having fuel on board, it also means you would have more weight on your car, but you can maybe use the weight as a factor or as a value in order to increase the stability of your car. And this is also noticeable with the Red Bull here, because at the beginning of the stint I was having more stability. But on the very same time, once you have tire wear, then you still have to be really careful once you want to put the power down. And I think in terms of the lap times as well as the consistency, especially, this can definitely be improved. But nevertheless, I just wanted to show you a race simulation run here. For the soft tire compound, I was also using the brake balance +2, I believe. And for both the medium tires as well as for the hard tire compound, I was using +5 in the end. And same for the qualifying session, because for the qualifying session I was using +5 as well. But just for the race, in order to save the rear tires a little bit here, I was driving a little bit more careful here in order to save the rear tires just a bit more. But if I also need to talk about the strategy here, fortunately, as we don't have to save fuel, you can try and think about, or let's say play around with the strategy a lot. Because on the previous Red Bull race, like the race we've done at Spa, because of the way how the fuel consumption rate was set up for that race, you were kind of limited in what you were able to do in terms of the strategy. Because let's say if you wanted to start on the soft tire compound, you had to follow up by using the hard tire compound and then finishing the race on the mediums. Or like if you wanted to start on the medium tire compound, then you could have either chosen the soft tires or the hard tires afterwards. But the soft tires and the hard tire compound had to be stick together. I think it's stick, isn't it? Or is it stuck? I think it had to be stuck together. Yeah, and in order to reduce, or like in order to use the pit stop animation, like the refueling animation, even less, or only once at that time. But as we don't have to use, or let's say as we don't have to save fuel for this race, you can play around with the strategy. So for example, you can start the race on a hard tire compound, then you can do then you can choose the medium tires for the middle of the stint in order to finish the race on a soft tire compound. Or you can also start the race on the medium tire compound, then use the softs in the middle of it in order to finish the race on the hard tire compound. So like, I think you get the idea. Like, you can try and play around with the settings a lot. But nevertheless, I still wanted to showcase you like the duration of each tire compound. Because I think for this race here, I was doing 11 laps with the soft tires, 18 laps on mediums, and only 1 lap with the hard tire compound. But if for example, if you struggle to save with the tires in general, then I would maybe advise to use the hard tire compound for just a little bit longer in order to reduce the amount of lap times you have to do, the amount of laps you have to do with the soft tire compound as well as with the medium tire compound. I think with the medium tire compound you can also try and play around with it because it's really durable and nice to drive for the race here. But with the soft tire compound you have to be careful, especially with the rear tires, and you can already see the tire wear on the bottom left hander, how much the rear left of the car is actually kind of trying to stay alive here. But yeah, other than that, what I can also try to mention here is the pit stop entry. Like, the pit stop entry is really difficult to see where the white line is. So the other advice I can try to give you here is, once you exit the final corner, try to go to the right hand side immediately in order not to cross the white pit lane line there. Because if you cross the pit lane line there, then you would immediately receive a 3-second penalty for it. And 3-second penalty at this circuit is quite brutal, so you should also try to be careful with the pit lane entry. But as for the pit stop exit, it's not really that difficult, because you're also about to see that in a few minutes. But yeah, I think from my side I can try to summarize that this race simulation run can definitely and should be improved. Because I was also doing few mistakes from my side. So for example, I was hitting the wall here. That was a really good example. Like, I was hitting the wall there, lost all the momentum for the following corners, and therefore ended up losing a lot of time afterwards. Or I also almost lost the car on those corners where I also talked about earlier, where you should also try to be careful with. For example, the uphill corner in sector 1. Because once you want to apply the throttle there, or like put the power down there, then you can also lose the rear a little bit, and if you do that, then you will also end up losing a lot of time. It would also increase the tire temperature there, because you would just end up, well, obviously you would slide the car, but it's like if you would spin the tires a bit too much, which is not ideal. But yeah, I think that's mainly it from my side. So I will also try to summarize it once again. So you don't have to save fuel. As for the tire wear, you should be... Yeah, like, this was another good example here where I almost lost the rear. But because of that, you should still try to look after your soft tire compound at least. As for the medium tire compound, you can try to push them, but also try to be careful with them a bit. If you struggle with the traction a bit, you can use traction control if it's needed. Also try to use the hard tire compound. Wait, how do you say that? Not as much as possible. Like, ideally only for 1 lap, but if you cannot achieve that, then you can try to aim to do 2 laps or 3 laps with the hard tire compound at least. But you also have to remember this, like, if you start the race on the hard tire compound, then go over to the medium tire compound, then obviously you might have, or like you will have, a better soft tire stint, because at that time you will have a lot less fuel on board, and that's also going to help the tire wear of your soft tire compounds a lot more. But on the very same time, like in this race simulation run I did here, you can see that I almost burned 30% of fuel already before going into the pits. So if you want to start the race on a hard tire compound, I think, if I remember correctly, you only burn like around 3% per fuel, or like 2% per lap. Then you would start the medium tire stint with a lot more fuel on board. So because of that, the tire wear on your medium tire stint is also going to increase a little bit. So in this race simulation run, I said earlier, like, I was doing 18 laps with it. But if you start the race on a hard tire compound, and then you want to switch over to the medium tires immediately, like at the end of lap 1 even, then maybe you cannot even do 18 laps, but instead 16 or 17 laps instead. And if that's the case, you have to try and make sure to finish the race with the soft tire compound, but on the very same time you still have to do like around 12 to 13 laps with it. That might be doable, but on the very same time you still have to be careful with the way how you treat the soft tires, but also how you drive in the soft tires then. So this makes the strategy a little bit more interesting in my opinion. But these are few informations I wanted to share with you all. Like you can try to play around with the strategy, also to see which one is the best. But try not to underestimate the impact of the amount of fuel you have on board, because that can also, not can, but that will also affect your tire wear in the end. But as for the overtaking opportunities, if I can also try to talk about them, obviously it's on the start finish straight at the end of it, or like before you approach turn 1, so you can try to overtake the driver in front of you there. If the driver in front of you has worse tires or a worse tire compound, then obviously you can also try to overtake them before heading into turn 3 if you have like a better run at the exit of turn 2. So like when I was talking about the track early, I was talking about turn 3 and not turn 2, so I apologize for that. Then you can also use the back straight to overtake the driver in front of you. But other than that, I think it's going to be really interesting to see how the race is going to unfold. And here this was like a really good example, like the way how you should also try to aim for the pit entry in order to avoid receiving a pit lane, like by a penalty for crossing the pit lane line. But yeah, other than that, I think it's a really interesting race, quite a challenging one in my opinion, but also a race where you have to be patient, especially the way how you have to treat the soft tire compounds. But I'm sure all of you will be able to do it quite well, and I also wish all of you all the best. Hopefully all of you will also manage to achieve a really good race result in the end. And from my side, I wish all of you all the best once again. Have a nice day, and hopefully I'll be able to see you guys on the next one. So until then, have a good one everyone. Cheers!